Hello, my fellow Americans. Welcome to the show. Today we'll be talking about the age of modernity, anxiety, and imperialism. We have two very special guests today. Josh Lewis and Kyler Forrest are both world-renowned historians. Please welcome our first guest today, Kyler Forrest.
Thanks for having me, Landon.
First topic of the evening is the development of the sciences and the emergence of a new physics. Kyler now gives a quick brief on the topic.
This topic is all about how science has changed over time, and great scientists such as Marie Curie and Albert Einstein have uncovered great world-changing discoveries.
Thank you for that great introduction to the subject. First question. What were the main discoveries found at this time in Europe?
One of the major discoveries was made by a great female scientist by the name of Marie Curie. She discovered that atoms had organelles in them and that radium gave off radiation rays. She was one of the first scientists to challenge Newton's law. Albert Einstein also had many great discoveries that challenged Newton's law, such as his theory of relativity.
Well, Marie Curie's discoveries did lead to a better knowledge of radiation science and the development of power plants. Unfortunately, the radiation that she worked with led to her untimely demise.
As people started to become more informed about science, they started to form their own beliefs about it, such as irrational movements. Glorified by Friedrich Nietzsche, he believed that Christianity should take much of the blame for Western civilization and enfeeblement.
So who else agreed with the irrational ideals going on at the time?
Searle also glorified irrational movements. He combined the ideas of Nietzsche and Bergson with his own passion of revolutionary socialism. He understood the politics of the non-rational movement and advocated violence as the only real solution.
Wow, that Nietzsche fellow sounds like a great guy.
Sigmund Freud, a Viennese doctor, founded the basic idea of psychoanalysis in the interpretation of dreams, which says that human life was determined by inner forces that we are oblivious of.
Wasn't Sigmund Freud the one who created the id, ego, and superego?
Yes, he said that human inner life was made of id, superego, and ego. He said that id contained crude appetites and impulses. The ego was the coordinator of behavior, and the superego was the locus consensus and represented the moral value that society put on people.
Are Sigmund Freud's discoveries still true today?
No, most of his discoveries have been disproven, like the Oedipus complex, where an infant attracted more to the parents of the opposite sex.
It looks like his ego was bigger than his brain. How did modernism affect culture in that time period?
Modernism affected culture by artists and writers rejecting old culture and making a new form called modernism.
So how did it affect the world literature?
Naturalists accepted the, the material world as real and felt literature should be realistic. Symbolism also played a big role in literature. It was primarily used in poetry.
So how did it affect the art world?
In the art world, modernism found its beginning in the Impressionist movement. Post-Impressionism retained the Impressionist emphasis upon light and color, but revolutionized it even further by paying more attention to structure and form.
Did the modernist movement have an effect on music?
Modernism in music included the elements of attraction to exotic and primitive, nationalist themes, and folk music.
So how were women viewed in the late 19th, early 20th century?
They were viewed as second-class citizens to men in almost every country.
What were some of the jobs given to women at this time?
They were called the women in white due to their roles in the medical field, and it helped women's rights movement as a whole because it was a proper job for them and gave them recognition for their work.
Do women have a tough time with divorce, and if so, why?
Yeah, they had a really tough time with divorce. Because they were considered inferior, all of their belongings were given to the husband, and were given nothing in return.
How did the right for women to vote play out in the mid-19th century?
Many reform movements were created for them to gain the right to vote, but they all failed.
How were Jews viewed in Europe in the late 19th century?
In Germany and Austria, they were hated because those countries were anti-Semitic. But in most countries, they were granted full citizenship due to the French decrees of 1790 and 1791.
What was the Zionist movement?
The Zionist movement was created by the Jews and was believed that Jews should have their own nation, and the nation they had in mind was Palestine. Palestine never happened, though, because the Zionist movement fell.
What's an example in history where anti-Semitism was used against a Jew?
One example of anti-Semitism used against a Jew was the Dreyfus Affairs.
What was the Dreyfus Affair?
The Dreyfus Affair was when Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish captain in the French General Staff, was falsely accused of treason. He was suspected of giving classified info to their enemies. Despite evidence against the true perpetrator, his punishment was being sentenced to the imprisonment on Devil's Island.
But he got a fair trial, right?
He was retried and found guilty just because he was Jewish.
Well, now we've reached the halfway point in the show, so we're going to have to let go of you, Kyler.
Thanks for having me on this show.
We'll be right back after this commercial break. All right, we are back with our next special guest, Josh Lewis, and he's here to talk about the second half of Chapter 24.
Thanks for having me on the show. And yes, the end of Chapter 24 was history altering. The implementation of imperialism and the African scramble affected the history books in a major way.
Well, our first topic of discussion is the growing tensions in Germany. Josh, can you explain the imperialization of Germany?
Yes, Otto von Bismarck began to imperialize Germany in 1871 to maintain pace with the rest of Europe. This proved successful because by the beginning of World War I, Germany had the strongest military in Europe.
How did Germany deal with the expansion of industry?
With the expansion of industry, it led to the introduction of the right-wing politics, where there was a conflict between modernization and traditionalism.
In the late 19th century, Russia began their well-known Industrial Revolution. Who began this revolution and why?
Sergei White began the revolution because he believed industrial growth was crucial to Russia's national growth.
What do you believe was the biggest improvement in Russia at that time?
I personally believe that the use of railroads was the biggest improvement because they increased the ability to trade and move things and people quickly.
So the United States and Canada improved in the 1900s, right?
That's correct, Landon. Both of these nations grew significantly in the 1900s. The United States became the world's richest nation and greatest industrial power.
Good old America.
It wasn't all good because the harsh working conditions of jobs. This led to the Progressive Era, where many reforms took place.
What about Canada?
At first, Canada was divided between the French-speaking Canadians and the English-speaking Canadians. That changed when Wilfrid Laurier became Prime Minister and industrialization boomed.
So moving on to the biggest topic of the chapter, new imperialism. What were the causes?
The main causes of the new imperialism were racism/Darwinism, religious motives, and economic motives. Darwinism/racism led countries like Great Britain to believe that they were superior than the natives in Africa. The white man's burden was a common belief in Europe.
Very interesting. What about the religious and economic motives?
Well, much like the Crusades in Jerusalem, Europeans wanted to spread their religion. They justified this by spreading their belief that they needed to civilize the natives. The economic motive is self-explanatory.
How so?
Well, if you combine the fact that natural resources in Europe were limited, and there was a plethora of natural resources like oil, tin, and rubber in Africa, then you would see why. Also, businesses invested where it was profitable, not wherever the country controlled.
Now I understand that the main site where imperialism occurred was in Africa.
Yes, that is completely true. In 1875, Europeans ruled 10% of Africa. By 1902, Europeans ruled 90% of Africa.
Could you explain what country controlled which portions of Africa?
Sure thing. By 1910, the Union of South Africa was created and was self-governing. Britain took over Egypt and Sudan. Italy was defeated by Ethiopia, but seized Libya in 1911. Central Africa was colonized by Belgium's King Leopold II, and treatment of the Africans was brutal. Germans established colonies in southwest Africa. Only Ethiopia and Liberia remained free states in Africa. Sudanese tried to rebel, but they were massacred by the recently developed machine gun.
Wow, that's a lot of information. So it was also imperialism in Asia. Could you explain what occurred?
The Dutch were in the East Indies, the Spanish were in the Philippines, and the French and Portuguese were on the Indian coast. Britain controlled India, Russia populated Siberia and Turkestan. Russia and Britain agreed to leave Afghanistan as a buffer state. When Russia tried to move into Korea, they fought and lost to Japan in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905.
Wow, Russia was aggressive in its methods of imperialization.
They sure were. In 1842, Britain had acquired Hong Kong and China was divided into spheres of influence. In 1910, Japan annexed Korea. Britain controlled Burma and the Malay states in Southeast Asia. France controlled Indochina. The Samoan and Hawaiian Islands were taken by the U.S., as well as Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines.
Wow, another long answer.
This, in my opinion, was the most important section of the unit.
Surely the countries targeted by imperialism did not just let the Europeans take over.
In some countries, that's all they could do due to the superior military strength.
Tragic. What were the responses in Africa?
Initial attempts to expel foreigners failed and led to the defeat of natives. A new class of African leaders who had knowledge of the Western world emerged. Farmland was confiscated and poor Africans were put on plantations and in sweatshops, while the middle class struggled to get decent jobs.
What about China?
The Boxer Revolution in China was an attempt to push out foreigners, which was squashed by many nations due to the bloodshed. China became poor, and Sun Yat-sen overthrew the Manchu dynasty in 1912.
How about Japan?
A samurai revolt in Japan led to the restoration of Emperor Mutsuhito, who adopted and modernized Japan.
Last but not least, what was India's response?
British manufactured goods destroyed local industries, and 2/3 of the population was malnourished in 1901. By 1919, India was seeking independence.
What are the results of new imperialism?
By 1900, almost all societies of Africa and Asia were either under control or in complete collapse. Only Japan, Ethiopia, Thailand, and Afghanistan escaped the desperate reaches of European countries. It heightened existing rivalries among European states.
So tell me about the Bismarckian system.
Bismarck knew he upset the balance of power by unifying Germany, so he made an alliance with Austria-Hungary. The problem in the Balkans was a product of the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. Russia fought the Ottoman Empire and won and made Bulgaria, but the Congress of Berlin reduced gained territory, and Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro were recognized as independent. Bismarck formed an alliance with Italy and Austria after Russia left and made the Reinsurance Treaty.
Very interesting. What were the new directions and new crisis?
William II of Germany dropped the Reinsurance Treaty, and Great Britain, France, and Russia formed the Triple Entente. Serbia became outraged at Austria for annexing Bosnia and Herzegovina. Russia took Serbia's side but backed down when Germany threatened war. Serbia, Montenegro, and Bulgaria beat the Ottomans in the First Balkan War, and the Second War started when they were unable to decide who got what.
Did these events lead to anything in the future?
Yes, these caused tension and resentment between the European nations leading into World War II.
Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. So thank you everyone for watching, and thank you to our guests, Josh and Kyler.